Hi, everyone. I'm here with a very special guest today, Amrit Sandhu. He's an international speaker, podcast host, and founder of the Inspired Evolution, certified by Eckhart Tolle School of Awakening. He's also Mindvalley's master certified trainer for Australia and India. Amrit delivers keynotes, talks, seminars, and workshops for the Inspired Evolution and Mindvalley in the United States, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Welcome, Amrit.
Oh, Suma, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, just love your background, love all the work you've been putting into your podcast. And it's just, yeah, it's a real honor and a treat to be here. Thank you for having me.
Likewise, I'm so delighted about this opportunity, especially because there's so much commonalities in some of our interviews. So it's
Definitely.
nice to have an opportunity to speak with another interviewer.
Mm.
So tell me about Inspired Evolution. Like, how did that idea came up? Why did you start Inspired Evolution?
Oh, wow. Okay. Into the crux of it. So, yeah, the Inspired Evolution was fundamentally birthed out of a pain point, actually. And I would almost go as far as calling it a dark night of the soul, but I actually struggled with, I had some mental health challenges long before coming to the Inspired Evolution, and those challenges informed by coming together of the Inspired Evolution in some ways as well. Let me make it less convoluted. So the key thing in there is having interviewed people over and over and over and over again on the Inspired Evolution now, it makes it really what people often ask me, like, what's one of the biggest lessons that you've taken away? And one of the things I see again and again is almost 100% of the time is people's greatest offerings in life when they're living in alignment to their service, to their dharma, comes from their biggest challenges, their biggest pain points, right? Like they overcame some sort of trial, tribulation, dare I say trauma, to overcome that and then live into, oh, this is what helped me, like get through it. And now I offer that to the world because, in some ways I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. So my big first challenge was I struggled with 6 years of depression way back when. And yeah, that was challenging to put it the least. Like I said, I wouldn't wish it upon your worst enemy in many ways. But the gift that came out of the other side of that, and we can talk more about it if you need to, is mindfulness and meditation. For some people, medication is the key, but for me, it was mindfulness and meditation that actually unlocked so much for me going forward. And so that that led to a great degree of self-awareness, because as you continue to meditate, self-awareness is one of just the natural byproducts that kicks in from there. And so it's interesting because you'd think as of that point, from like with a great deal of self-awareness, your life would start to reorganize, and it did started to reorganize itself. But one of the next big challenges I had, even having like this high level of self-awareness, was, even just to provide some context, one of the key things where I realized I was depressed was when I actually got asked to leave university back in, I can't remember now, 2011, 2012. It was a long time ago now. But yeah, I got asked to leave university. And that was really challenging because for me, my whole life up until that point, I'd been like academic, like, a good Indian boy raised in a Western country, like very good at maths, very good at science, very good at numbers. And that was one of the hallmark signs of like, oh, like my relationship's not working out. My university's asked me to leave. Like something is not right. Like, work, like there was my friends, every avenue of my life was just starting to like disintegrate around me. And I was just like, and it was very difficult to be a part of that. But the reason I share that is because after having worked through the depression with meditation and mindfulness, when I graduated, like I went back to university, started to sort everything out. And when I graduated university the second time around, like when I actually went back to university second time around, I finally graduated. I graduated not just, and this is going to sound egotistical for a moment, but just bear with me for a sec. I didn't just graduate top of like structural engineering. I didn't just graduate top of engineering. I graduated top of like the university for that year, like all degrees, all students. And there was a series of interview panels that they had in terms of, how they were going to win, like award this. And there were some really great candidates going through this process. And the last question in the last interview they asked me was very interesting. They said, why should we give this award to you over anybody else? And it was one of those questions that I just hadn't prepared for. I was just like, oh, It's a very good question. Like everyone else is actually like I looked at like, the lineup of people that were there. I was like, they're actually all really incredible people. It was one of those moments where you sort of like, Jesus, take the wheel, you know? You just go, oh, I haven't prepared for this. Open your mouth, share what comes up. And what came through was my truth, which was ultimately, hey, like it would be pretty amazing a story to illustrate how important mental health is if I was to win this award. Because the same individual that got asked to leave the university just 3 years ago, having worked through meditation and mindfulness, is now graduating top of the university across all degrees and all subjects, right? And I know how egotistical that sounds, so pardon me for that bit. But that delta, it's the same person. Yeah, it's just a different headspace. And so that was, and I think that answer must have resonated quite deeply with them. And I said, like, if you give me this award, I will use it to inspire others and use it to, notably inform others of how important the mental health space is. Now, that sounds like the perfect segue to like, as of that point, Amrit created the Inspired Evolution. I wish. Actually, from there, I got like my ideal job because I was heavily decorated as a student, walked into the workforce here in Melbourne building high-rise towers. And from there, pursued like 7.5 years of career misalignment, which was actually really, really challenging for someone such as myself. Now, I look back now and I've got some really easy languaging around it. I coach a lot of people through transitions, not necessarily just career transformations, but several different types of transformations, but career is one of them. And I can look back now and just say, oh, right, I was living out of alignment with my values. Yeah. So I wasn't living in alignment to who I was put here to be. And so even with that great level of self-awareness in terms of like, these are the things that hold me back from achieving things, I went ahead and I started unlocking things and I was able to go achieve. And then when I finally got into the space, I was like, achieve as much as you can in this space. It's like, this isn't my space. Right. And so I was like consistently showing up like, and I jokingly say from stage when I share this, it's, you know, I'm not any more special than anybody else, really. Like, I don't think so. I just feel like construction here in Melbourne, in Australia, is 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., 6 days of the week, rather than a 9 to 5, 5 days of the week. So I just front loaded all of that. You know, people have their midlife crisis in their 40s. I just front loaded all the work hours, like up front, to just go, oh my God, this isn't working for me, to all that pain. So that pain was actually the birth point of the Inspired Evolution. Right. So there was individuals such as yourself, podcasters, coaches, speakers, authors, entrepreneurs, creatives, just, spiritual luminaries, like people having a positive impact, whether it was their life's work or not, they were able to have a positive impact. Their time here on earth was spent doing something that was meaningful and they were having an impact to them. So I was inspired by that. I was inspired by all these individuals. For me, I felt like I was stuck, in this. And it's not a dead end job. Like, it's really not. It's an incredible opportunity, but it wasn't the right opportunity for me. And we can talk more about that in today's episode. But nonetheless, like I felt so stuck. And so I was ready to evolve and I was inspired by all these people. And that was the birthplace of the Inspired Evolution. And it was like, okay, let's just, the idea, because I'm an engineer by background, similar to yourself, it was, my background being an engineer, I was just like, what I'm going to do is basically what China does to Germany's machines. Yourself, kind of, and all these people being the German machines. I'm going to interview all these people, figure out how Germany operates and puts together these really cool, like well-oiled German machines. And then, I don't know, not to sound disrespectful to Chinese engineering, but like, take it apart, put it back together, and then hopefully the printer will print something, and we can produce it. And so that was the idea, to interview people every week. For the last 8 and however many years now, we've been doing an episode a week. Now we do 2 a week. And it's, touch wood now, podcaster, coach, speaker, as you see it. So that was the birthplace of the Inspired Evolution, was the career, the challenges, the career misalignment, and just how painful that was, and learning to navigate my way through that. Again, our biggest challenges equal our biggest gifts. Touch wood.
That is an inspiring story. Thanks for sharing. And when I was reading about you, I also discovered that you had, for mental health, you had also tried the path of medication. So you would have a unique perspective on what's it like to deal with depression and try to heal using medication versus an alternative path like
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. I will put a massive asterisk in the conversation really quickly at this juncture because, and disclaimer, I guess to some degree, there are, like, having coached over like 360 or maybe some more now, 360 people one-on-one really deeply through personal transformations. Some of them have had, mental health stuff that they've had to work through. There's definitely and we can talk about all the different reasons why. There definitely are people out there that have a chemical imbalance in their brain, and taking something like an SSRI like can help with your serotonin. Absolutely. Yeah. There's definitely people out there that need that level of support. The challenging thing, right? And this is where I'll just step off the asterisk and the disclaimer for me to, like, they've statistics are rolling in 2025, 1 in 2 are going to be anxious and depressed. That's 1 in 2. Like, in this conversation, out of the two of us, I've been there, right? So touch wood, but like 1 in 2. Yeah. And so I just find it very difficult to believe that 50% of the population needs to walk around medicated. Like that either there's like, that's a sign and a symptom of, like, a breakdown of societal values or something at large. We can speculate on that. But one thing I can say is that just doesn't feel right to me, and that's what maybe you're alluding to, my unique perspective. Like, I just don't think 1 in 2 should be walking around medicated. I don't think people need to medicate their way through reality. Now, that's to say, yes, absolutely. Like I said, some people will need that support. But I think potentially what's happening at large is we're not living in alignment to things that really matter to us. We're put here for a reason, and we can talk more about how we come off our center, if you will. But when you're following your center and the things that are really inspired to your evolution, like my podcast, my coaching, is part of my mental health strategy. Yeah. Like, me doing this work is the work that matters most to me. And it's what I feel like, touchwood, is my dharma. I was put here to do. And so now that I get to execute in that space, I'm a happier person, But I remember, like, going back to actually viscerally answering your question, because it was a psychiatrist that actually recommended the antidepressants, and it was my GP, my doctor, that actually recommended this breathing exercise, which I just didn't even know was mindfulness. She just said, "Hey, try breathing." And at the time when she gave me breathing, actually, I was like, "Breathing? Are you serious? Like, we all breathe." But nonetheless, it was just, I took it on board. And I remember taking my first pill, and what happened for me was, it was actually amazing. Like, I was at home, there was stuff that needed to be done for months, and literally in the next 4-hour window, like, I cleaned my room, I cleaned this, I sorted myself out. Like, I was young, yeah? So I was like, I just got so much stuff done in 4 hours that I was just like, oh my God. And there was no negative self-talk. There was just flow, ease. And I was just like, oh my God, like, this is what it can be like. This is ridiculous. The thing that happened was about 4.5 hours later, though, I crashed. And I didn't really crash lower than where I started, but just coming back to baseline was a crash from the place that I had been. And I found it personally very disconcerting, and I'm sure for some people it's just purely a relief. And for me, it was a relief to be in that space. But when I came back down, like, I couldn't help but have a very stern, like, serious conversation with myself. I was like, do I want to continue living on this up, down, up, down, up, down? And my sense was no. Like, that was just, I don't know, I still can't tell you, like, because I was quite young, like I was 22, right? So I just picked up the pills, and I literally remember just throwing them in the bin. And yeah, I still don't know where I got the courage to do that from, to be honest. Because yeah, like, I'd just been diagnosed with depression, and I hadn't even realized that the breathing could help at that point, right? It was just like, this doesn't feel right. I don't want to be up, down, up, down, up, down. So I threw them in the bin. The moment that breathing actually clicked in was when I was in university clearing out my locker for the last time. And it was super anxiety provoking, being there, interfacing with that moment. And I went to pull out my phone to call someone. And in the back of my phone, by some grace of God, I had a clear cover, and I had put the breathing exercise that was given to me by the GP on a Post-it note on the back of my cover facing outwards. I don't know why I put it there, obviously, for this moment. But I pulled out my phone to call someone, and then just to sort of help navigate the tension and the pressure of the moment. But I just tried the breathing exercise. I just went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And every time I did that, the walls literally were just breathing out and breathing out and breathing out. And I was just like, what is going, like, I just, and I just got super curious, super curious. And this was probably 2 weeks after having thrown out the pills. And so, yeah, that sort of hooked me into meditation and mindfulness. But yeah, my unique perspective, I guess, is that, and I'm not sure if it's that unique or that special. I just find it hard to believe that 50% of us need to be walking around medicated. That just seems, I don't know, your thoughts? Like, yeah.
I'm my perspective, it's more from as an outsider. I agree with you, like maybe there is certain percentage of people who need medication for chemical imbalance, but I've also online seen stories of people who are finding it extremely difficult to get off of this medication, and
Yeah.
uh, it's like
Because of exactly that, right? Like you've gone up and then you've come down and then you've gone up and then you've come down. And like dealing with baseline reality is quite difficult when you know how, and they're not a silver bullet, because people often ask me like, is your, like, do you just feel good all the time? And it's like, it's like a buffering of bandwidth. It's like you stop feeling bad, but you also don't feel good anymore, like as good anymore either. It's not like a silver bullet. Yeah. It's not just like everything that's bad is just blocked out and you just feel amazing. It's like, here we go. Absolutely not. Yeah. You've got a range, let's call the range 0 to 100 centered at 50. And that's your normal operating range, right? And there's some challenges in your life that keep you dug around like 10 or 0 for a particular moment in time because you're out of alignment, let's say. That's Amrit talking now. But most people are meant to be centered around 50. You go up to 60, 70, you come down to 40, 30, and it like kind of does this, in day-to-day living. Now, obviously, there are some challenges if you're spending all your time down at 10. Your life needs to be reevaluated. Like, why am I spending all this time down at 10? But just to speak to the medications for a sec, like, I feel like your bandwidth goes down to like 35, 65. Yeah. So those moments where you would have had like 100 and like joy, peak experience as well, it's like, oh my God, like you're also buffered from experiencing that fully, but you're also buffered from experiencing anything below 35 fully as well. So you live in this sort of buffered reality, which can be very helpful for certain people through certain periods. But it is also, it is also not the full spectrum of life that's on offer, I would suggest, touch wood. I'm conscious of how that sounds for some people. Again, the disclaimer, certain people do need medications. But yeah, that's my experience.
I resonate with that. For me personally, I would see it as a last resort. When I have tried everything else, then maybe that's as a last resort. But because and maybe I'm too skeptical about medication after hearing about so many stories of people who have gotten addicted to them, and it has gotten way worse than what it was before for us.
Yeah, and I've also got clients, their GPs and their medical practitioners are prescribing them. This is like, again, I sound so jaded when I say this. I have so much respect for doctors and GPs. Like it's a big world out there. Yet one of my clients in particular at the moment, he's going through some mental health challenges. He went to his GP to seek support, which is the first thing you should do. If anybody listening to this podcast is like, hey, I don't know where to start, like I feel like something's off with my mindset, it's your GP, right? You don't have to go find a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a counselor. Go to your GP. Your GP will help you, will inform you in terms of what your next steps are. Just, mental health first aid training, that's what you're going to share. Now, one of the key things is like this guy, he went along to his GP and the GP referred him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist one of his first questions out of the psychiatrist's mouth was, hey, do you have insurance? And my client was like, what does that have to do with anything? And then we unpacked it a little bit. It's like, do you reckon it's kind of like if you've got insurance, you can continue to stay like, and right now he's prescribed him onto like 4 different pills at the same time. And I'm like, what is the advantage of you being, and the country he's in, like there's sort of, anyway, the medical system's different to how it is here in Australia or in the US. So there are advantages to prescribing certain medications and not prescribing others. But yeah, it was just, I don't know. It just, yeah, I'm a little bit jaded from certain experiences where it feels like we can be a bit heavy-handed to overprescribe medications. Um, yeah, yeah, it's a treacherous, and it's hard to sort of say again that medications aren't right for some people. Absolutely, they are for certain people, um, but it can't be for everybody. It can't be that like 1 in 2 people need them.
Yeah, I would say like my personal opinion is it's better to do a lot of research before getting into that, and listening to stories of people who have gotten into that and why they wouldn't recommend getting into the whole world of medication.
Yeah. So even some people that have imbalances, I think it's important to take charge of your own treatment, really, is what I would suggest is like, have a look at, contraindications of what you're currently taking online. Like that's always really valuable now. There's some really great websites online. But also like doctors are like, especially with mental health, it's happening inside your head. They can't really see. Right. And so if it was me, like, and if this was like literally like was happening to myself, then I'd be like I'd be willing to take the medication potentially for 3 months to sort of see how it goes, because I can see the efficacy of the results that it delivers, but then also having a very finite sort of time frame on it. Not this I've been on this for like 3 years 4 years now, and now I've got to try and wean my way off. It's a long time, right, to be playing with something as fundamental as serotonin in your mind. Yeah. But like 3 months gives you a taste of like, okay, this is what reality can be like. And then also you come off and then you're like, wow, something's not right for me, right? Do I need to continue to be medicated, or do I actually need to make some serious lifestyle shifts and changes that will actually put me in a place that is much more supportive for where I'm at?
Yeah, empowering yourself to make that decision rather than a doctor imposing you.
Yeah, like taking charge of your own journey, which sounds counterintuitive in many ways. But I've just seen again, like it's just so easy for like, because you got to picture a doctor's day as well. Sometimes you're just one patient of like 20 that's walked through their door in the day, and it's a quick check in to sort of, yep, this is what will help, off you go. And they do have the continuity of care. I'm sure you come back in, but at the same time, you're just one person on there, but it's like viscerally your experience. Like it seems like an easy way to get through today to sort of, have the pills and, make your way through the next 3 to 4 years. But then at the end of the 3 to 4 years, this is now your life. Like you're living it all the time, which is like, oh, now I want to get off this thing. And there's consequences. Pills aren't like your immune system's impacted, there's lots of different things that manifest in your system. There's always a trade-off. There's always a trade-off that you got to be aware of.
I'm glad we started with this story, because sometimes when we talk about self-awareness or the journey of awakening, it can be an intimidating topic for some people, because people feel like you have to be in this Zen space where everything is perfect with you and you're like calm, wise person who never gets angry. So it's inspiring to hear a story where you could start off of a like rock bottom in your mental health journey, and this potential is still there, where of self-awareness and waking
Well,
up.
it's really interesting to hear that, Sima, because I find, and maybe it's just, yeah, I find that actually the process of breakdown to break through is such a fundamental one. Like I look around and having interviewed people for the last 8 years, like I can't even picture a situation where someone's just been vibing and then they've just vibed higher. you know, it's like there was vibing and then there was like, oh, and then, they had to break down to break through. And I've asked this question of several people on the podcast again and again. It's like, why is that such a fundamental pattern of learning? And it comes back to that. It's like education. It's like, as human beings, it's our pattern of learning. To break down, to break through is just a key way to learn from failure. It's all like success does teach us a lot of things, but even to those people listening to the podcast, yourself, Suma, like I invite you guys to just take a sec to recognize or reflect, even before recognition, is when was your last success, like big success that you can, bring that to mind, and sort of what were the lessons that you took away? Yeah. And then now think back to your last big failure and what were the big lessons that you took away? Yeah. And your failure doesn't even have to be that big to rear up in your mind to kind of go, oh, yeah, I learned that and I learned that and I learned that and I won't be doing that again, But your success has to be even also quite big and be like, oh, yeah, and that was, I showed up consistently and I did a bit of this and it was like, good. So we have a propensity from learning from our failures. It's just the human condition in many ways. Now, that is shifting and changing more and more as people are waking up, because I think that is there's a better term than barbaric. Backwards is probably the right word. I think that sort of model of learning hopefully is reaching a use by state. I'm not sure if it is or if it isn't. It's still very much present in all the clients that I'm coaching. And I still, from seminars, teachings, it is consistently breakdown to breakthrough. But, a lot of the spiritual teachers that I interview now, there does seem to be a shift that's coming for us, which seems at the moment, in this particular moment in time, seems like there's a lot of breakdown happening collectively. But the intention being that we do break through collectively as well, and there's going to be less intensity to the breakdowns. And yeah, but again, I'm not an authority to speak to that. This is just what I've learned from podcasting individuals myself.
And having interviewed so many people, so going back to your metaphor of like a German car where you disassemble all the parts of the car. So what are some of these like crucial parts have you discovered in an awakening process? What would you consider are like some of these major hallmarks in a person's life?
Yeah, I keep seeing the hero's journey play out again and again and again and again. Now, everybody has different cycles, I would say. Some people operate 3-year cycles, some people 7-year patterns, some people 9-year patterns. But there are these cycles and patterns that you see, where like almost seasons of life, if you will. But even what I was sharing earlier about the biggest challenge, biggest gift is the climax of the hero's journey that we actually go through, right? Like you start off and everything's kind of, I don't want to say hunky dory, but I'm picturing the hobbits. But you're living quite comfortably. Everything's kind of kosher. But then something sort of comes along and it's like, things could be different, or things could be better, or things, some sort of challenge or some sort of invitation to a challenge sort of arises. And then from there, you set out on the adventure and, you confront the dragon, and then you slay the dragon. And then almost it's like the sword that helped you slay the dragon, you bring it back, and you come back to your village, this somewhat a hero for a moment. But then at the end of it, it's like, okay, guys, this is the sword. And this is how, if anybody else faces a dragon, this is how you can slay the dragon. That's the path of service and dharma, right? But then you're back to living in society, and it's just, chop wood, carry water. You're back to that before awakening, chop wood, carry water. After awakening, chop wood, carry water. So the hero's journey I see played out a lot in terms of the narrative of awakening. And so, yeah, that seems to be a consistent theme, but it does also show up. I think people also feel like it's one and done. I don't want to sound disparaging, but we do tend to have these cycles, that we go through, and everybody is, I think, and I'm not an astrologer, but being Indian is like everything is written in the stars. Right? So it's touch wood. Yeah, there's a little bit around. I think probably maybe some of that plays into what patterns and what cycles are more prevalent for yourself. Yeah, there's many ways I could answer your question, but that's the one that comes to mind right now.
And everyone has, from what I've seen while interviewing people, everyone has a different way, their own flavor of describing awakening. How would you describe awakening? What is awakening for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the connotations of awakening first describe like sleep, right? Because if it's like you're asleep to something and then you awaken to something else. And so it's a process in my mind of like uncovering something that was unseen or like dormant or left unchecked or you hadn't seen before. And so I think that's also where the challenges sort of arise as well, because there probably was some part of you that wasn't looking at something because it was comfortable until it becomes too uncomfortable not to notice. Yeah. And then you notice and it's like, oh, that's uncomfortable, and now you've got to do the work, hashtag the work, right? And so now you start to do the work and then you work your way through it, right? And now you start to awaken. So now that's the day-to-day sort of working with your trials and tribulations to awaken. But I'm sure, there are moments where you're, taking the time to meditate, sit, chill, and insights just drop in. So a really great the Japanese have a really great awareness around this. They call it Satori and Kensho. Have you come across those before? Should I share them really quickly?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So the Japanese say there's two ways that human beings like spiritually sort of learn, right? Um, and one of them is Satori, which is like it's one for one with what we call samadhi. It's you you give in to insight basically, and like it's that when you're visualizing someone sitting on a meditation cushion and the heavens are opening up with a beam of light and just downloading information right like, that moment of just celestial download. Yeah, that's Satori, right? And then there's the samurai stick, which is Kensho. Kensho is like learning through challenge. And so, and again, when asked as to, why are there these two ways that we have to learn, everybody would love to learn through Satori, but it just seems much more infrequent that we have Satori insights. We much more like frequently get the Kensho insights. And, when you start speaking to spiritual teachers, most of them say Earth is a school where we're here to learn, right? So it's a learning experience. So you can learn through divine insight or you can learn through challenge, but you've got to learn, right? And divine insight seems to rock up more intermittently, less frequently, whereas the challenges are like ready to roll, So it's just part of the curriculum in some ways, touch wood. And I don't want to sound flippant about that, because I know some of the people's challenges, like, can be quite serious at various times. But yeah, the awakening can come through profound insight or through facing your challenges. But you're generally waking up from something that was not this way before into a whole new state, way of being. And generally, I would say there's a greater awareness coupled with it, greater awareness.
Were there any insights for you during these interview process that stood out and left an impression?
Oh, so many. So the interesting thing about the podcast, right? And I'm not sure, like, I'd love to get your take on this as well. Like the podcast, the way that I set it up, like people used to ask me, like, is the podcast successful? Does the podcast this? And for the longest time, I didn't really know how to answer the question because really I wasn't measuring success. Like the podcast has been it's an opportunity to learn from people. Like remember the German engineering machine and the Chinese, it's like I was just taking, like interviewing German machines. I was just like, how does this work? How does this work? How do you do this? What's going on here? And it was interesting that people that had something remarkable to offer also had some remarkable life stories to go with them. So I think that's what made the podcast interesting to some degree, touch wood. But like we've been discussing, that's not coincidental, actually. That's a bit of a formula almost, touch wood. Now, I don't want to sort of say that and people go, oh, I need to go find my next biggest challenge. Like that's, your life is your life. Your life is your life. Don't go hunting down. Don't be masochistic. is in there. But yeah, so it's hard because every single episode has taught me something, and I know that's such a cop-out response in so many ways. So I will give a proper response to it. But the way the podcast is set up, it's like my own school, is what I started to realize slowly. And it's like I'm learning the things that I specifically want to learn from myself, from the teachers that I've chosen to be my teachers. So I'm really a big fan of the medium, as you can imagine. So yeah, that's to sort of say I've learned so much along the journey. Like you can imagine, 8 years plus years, every week an interview. It's been quite the relationship that I've built with this podcast. Yeah, there's so many lessons. Oof. One of the big ones that I think has really been coalescing more and more recently is, and maybe this is just the nature of where the podcast has been going recently, is that, 3D animate reality as we experience it is really built upon so much more interdimensionality wise. Like, you might want to call it spirit, you might want to, like, some people have, like, the quantum, like, whatever you want to call it, there is so much going on metaphysically almost behind the curtain. But I think when people start to say that, a hint of fear starts to get into, like, what's happening that we can, and it's not to be feared. It's like when you're watching a movie, right? It's like there's a projector screen and you're watching the movie. Like, it's a movie. It's really amazing. Like, is there anything to fear in the movie? No, it's like you're actually this, you know. But then also, it's like if you look back and it's like, dude, someone put together film. They had to figure out what to put film on. They had to figure out how to thread film. They had to figure out how to put it in sequence. They had to figure out how to emanate light through them. Like, so much went in to the experience over there on the screen to happen. Yeah. So there's just seems like there's so much going on to the substrate of reality, that I find just really fascinating and really in awe of, really, because just as I know I run the risk of sound like I'm just tripping on mushrooms all the time, but I was just sitting in the garden the other day and I was just taking a moment to just ground. And I was just like in awe of the fact that we have an atmosphere, like an atmosphere where we can breathe, we give back to the trees give back to us. And I was like, we have an atmosphere. Everything that's enabled, like part of this experience, is like the atmosphere is such an enabling force and factor in our environment. And from there, it's just like, what, like, how does it just perfectly coincide that there is an atmosphere? Like so many other planets have their own atmosphere that's not, conducive to life as we know it. And it just started to bug me out. I just started to, like, just find myself in so much gratitude for just the existence the way that it is. Right. So that to say, so many different episodes, so many different insights. But recently, it's just the metaphysical substrate that the physical is built upon, is really, really present for me at the moment. Touchwood.
And having explored some of these topics, you may have gathered some insights also on the possibilities of evolution of consciousness. Do you have any thoughts on what pathway is this evolution moving?
Yeah, I guess that's the hard part about being a podcaster, because you get a lot of different data points, all saying similar things, but not the exact same thing. Right. So when you ask me that question of like the pathway of consciousness, generally the first thing that my mind leans into is, the yugs, being Indian, it's like, we go through Treta, Dwapar, and then Kal Yuga, like we go through these different ages. And depending on who you speak to, some people are like, hey, we're popping out of Kal Yuga now, we're like, it's happening right now. And I'm like, from what I shouldn't say studied, what I've been indoctrinated probably is probably the right way. From my own belief system, based on what I was taught earlier on, apparently we're thick in Kali Yuga at the moment. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's just, yeah, there's benefits to actually being in this alive in this time. And there's also challenges. That's what you need to know. Right. But the Kali Yuga is known as, darkness, because the light of consciousness, if you will, is not as the conduit has much more filters through it. Let's just, as in need of a metaphor, right? There's much more filters between the light of consciousness. Yeah. But at this particular moment in time, it's heavily filtered. But there are pros to that. Yeah. Like for your soul's evolution, like it can do the scrubbing up of all the shadow aspects as, as efficiently as possible at these moments, if you really want to work through soul evolution. And then there's, we're going to go through phases where we return. So where we are in terms of, and these cycles are like 23,000 year cycles. And it's like, I'm not pointing the finger, but like, nobody, you can't tell me the right. It's like, it's hard to tell 23,000 year cycles. But I'm conscious when some people's turnings of the yugas fit a narrative that suits them, then I become a little bit skeptical, touch wood. But I think a healthy dose of skepticism is required around spiritual work for sure. Yeah. So again, when you say, the evolution of consciousness, for me, I think fundamental tenet that I believe in is that we are the universe looking in on itself. Like that is like ground 101 for me, you know. Everything else I, you know, coach to unpack, support people with comes from that foundational block, right? Because the key thing we then start to deduce is if I'm the universe looking in on myself, then inherently, what does that tell us about the nature of the universe? Well, fundamentally, it's curious, right? So curiosity is part of the source code, if you want to call it something, of the universe. It's actually sacred. Yeah, like the things that you are, like the things that Suma is curious about innately is what Suma is curious about. What Amrit's curious about, Amrit's curious about. Like we can't fake our curiosities. Yeah. And those are actually divine. Now, what ends up happening though is our curiosities, despite our sacred curiosities we can't fake, we get conditioned and trained and our curiosities get hijacked, right? So in a capitalistic society, you're encouraged to consume. Yeah. And so now that you're encouraged to consume, it's like, hey, if I just program a little bit of fear in you around the way, let's just an easy one, the way you look. Yeah. Like your visual, like the way you look isn't good enough. You need to go to the gym, or you need to wear this kind of underwear, or you need to do that, or you need to wear this shirt, or you need to wear this brand, or you need to wear that. You're much more likely to consume because you're not enough if you're not living into that. So now your curiosity has been hijacked. It's like, oh, now you start giving a shit about brands. You don't give a shit about brands. Do you genuinely care? I don't think so. Right? But prestige is this really interesting thing that lives in the mind of the other that you then animate yourself towards. Right? And so now it's like you're playing this thought game with yourself about the thoughts of others that you're now animating yourself with. Right? So many layers in there. But that's a clear example of your own curiosity. You're not curious about brands, but it's been hijacked. Yeah. And that's what ends up, like, you go back to career misalignment for me. You fast forward that, right? And you end up with something like, hey, I'm now a structural engineer. And it's like, why? Because my mum and dad thought it'd be great for me to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, one of those things. And so I lived into that story, right? My curiosity got hijacked. I was like, this is what's good for you. And as a young kid, you don't know what's good for you. Right? Your parents are God. I'm not saying my parents did the wrong thing. They did the best they could with the data points and information they had. That's what they thought was going to unleash the best future for me. Nonetheless, and it wasn't just them. Society told me this. You know, my partners were like, you're great at physics, you're great at maths, you should be an engineer. Yeah. But, you know, my results in English weren't always the best. You know, like sometimes they were really good, sometimes they weren't. The thing I always got really good results in was like visual presentation. And it was just like, that was like one little sliver of an entire field that everybody neglected, which is actually exactly what I love doing the most, right? Is connecting people to people and connecting people to ideas. Like communication is one of the things I like live and breathe, touch wood. It matters so much to me. Yeah. And so, you know, you get hijacked, and then in there it's like, oh, but what was innately you? And to understand your own sacred curiosities, the key thing you need to discover are your values. Right? Because then you can do an audit, right? You can audit any curiosity against, is this sacred or is this hijacked? Yeah, that's where you need to understand your values. And to understand your values, mine's a connection, contribution, celebration. Yeah, those are my 3 values: connect, contribute, celebrate. For those that are curious and tuning in and you want to go find your values, inspiredevolution.com/values. You give yourself 20 minutes in the masterclass. You will literally be as clear as I am on my values as, 20 minutes from now, you'll have your values, right? Connect, contribute, celebrate are mine. And that's also, I'm conscious to share that because what's right for me is not what's right for you. You need to understand your values and build your life upon that. So let's just quickly do the values audit, right? So if I'm looking at connect, contribute, celebrate, and I'm looking at structural engineering, do I get to connect? Not really. Do I get to contribute? Somewhat to society, yeah. Not the contribution I want to have, but I can somewhat. Is there celebration in there? No. So half of my top 3 values are being met. That goes to say, structural engineering, not a bad degree, not a bad job. It's an amazing job. Not for Amrit though. There's someone out there that's got the right value set that's absolutely perfect for. But when you look at now what I do, is like podcasting. Do I get to connect? Yes. Do I get to contribute? Yes. Do we get to celebrate? Well, hopefully you're living life a little bit richer for having tuned into this. Yes. Coaching, connection, really deep one-on-one. Contribution, yes. Celebration, yes. Right? Public speaking, connection, lots of people in the room. Yeah. Contribution, yes. Celebration. So now you can see like, and so when you start to look at that, that actually starts to cultivate passion. And so now the mental health situation starts to change because I'm living into my authentic self and I'm enjoying the things that I'm doing. There's actually joy. Like today's like having this conversation with you feels like we've been talking for 5 minutes. I don't know how long we've been going for, but it's been longer than 5. But I could keep riffing with you because touch wood, we're both into this, right? And so that's what it looks like when you're living in alignment. And so now it's like medicate my way through. Why would I medicate my way through the joy of the work that I love doing? I don't, you know? And that's where I start to think the antidote starts to really open up. Just to round out, just to be completely comprehensive, once you've got your values, you can discern between your curiosities, like whether they're hijacked or whether they're your sacred curiosities. If you have your sacred curiosities and you can actually draw a ring around 3 or 4 things that you're interested in, for me, it was like personal development, lifestyle, spirituality, communication. You know, there's a few things I could draw a circle around, like collect. The formula is generally 5 or more, but 3 also works. 5 or more curiosity points, sacred curiosity points. If you can schedule some time to hang out and spend time with those things, you're actually cultivating your passions. That's all it is. People are like, I don't know what I'm passionate about. What are you curious about? At the intersection of your curiosities are passions. That's all it is. And if you take the time to cultivate that, now people are like, oh, okay, cool. I can understand what I'm curious about. And if you're not sure, take a look around. My house is full of books, musical instruments. Books are all on spiritual. Like take a look at your house. Like there's, you know, gym equipment. There's also like, you know, it's boom. Yeah, it reflects back who you are. You can't turn it off. These are your sacred. Even when society's trying to tell you to be somebody different, your true self is always there. Yeah. And so if your space is Spartan and minimalist, take a look at your browser history. What have you been searching? What are you researching? Is it hot rod cars? You know, is it, you know, Japanese art? Like what is it that really speaks to you? Yeah. So that gives you an idea around your curiosities. Now, if you continue to cultivate your curiosities, you fill up your cup of passions, right? Like you fill up your cup. People go, oh, fill up your cup. What does that mean? This is what it means to me, right? Take the time to cultivate your curiosities, fill up your cup of passion. And eventually, if you just keep doing that, and it takes some time to cultivate your passions, right? Like I was podcasting for a long time before I became a coach. I was just cultivating like curiosities, filling up the cup of passion. And then eventually what ended up happening is like someone from the audience said, hey, will you coach me? And therein lies the hack for purpose, spiritual purpose. Because it's like if you're overflowing because you're naturally cultivating something that is naturally energizing for you, like this conversation here today, connection, contribution, celebration, feeding into passions. Someone's like, hey, will you coach me? And it's like, yeah, sure. I'd love to have this conversation with you. I'm having these conversations all the time. It's like water off a duck's back in many ways. Touchwood. Now, your passions served to others. Service is purpose. So your passions are for you, but your purpose is delivering your passions to others. But don't rush that process. Allow your cup to be so full that it's like, hey, I would do this for free. But then generally the interesting piece is at that point someone goes, oh, but I'd love to pay you because obviously this is your life's work. And it's like, oh, fantastic. Okay, now you're in service, right? So all the way from curiosity all the way through to purpose. First cultivate, then serve.
Beautifully described. By the way, I love the word hijacked. It's such it's a perfect word to describe some of the things we get influenced by, and we don't even have an idea that what do we really want? What do we really think about something? So eliminating those hijacked thoughts would be maybe like one of the first things to do.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I'm glad that it's good feedback because actually the book Metaflow is what I'm writing, and it's actually with the editor now, coming out next year. So yeah, it's nice to know that the terms feel relevant. Yeah.
So coming back to the concept of evolution of consciousness, it seems like you are leaving it open-ended. You don't have you don't want to kind of hijack that.
Well, in terms of evolution of consciousness, I think it's like it's infinite. Like there's a poem by Andy Weir that I invite everybody to read. It's a short story. It's called The Egg. And I definitely won't butcher it by paraphrasing it, but you guys should read it. It takes a grand total of like 2 minutes to read the whole thing. But where consciousness is just it's going through this I am one, it's unity, and then it's like divided, and then the Kal Yuga is like what we described earlier, is like where it's most divided, and then it's going to return back to wholeness. So the evolution is just it's cyclical. It's like, yep, I know myself, and then I don't know myself, and then I know myself. And it's like not knowing myself gives me an opportunity to explore myself as richly as possible to then go back to knowing myself. Yeah. So in terms of evolution, it's pretty clear we're going to end up back at unity with a lot more information about ourselves originally. What that looks like for humanity at large, I think the cycles are so large that it's very difficult for me to conceive what it looks like when we step back into unity consciousness.
And based on some of the conversations you are having, how does AI factor into this?
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, I think being in a spiritual space, people kind of want me to be a bit fearful of AI. At the moment, I mean, my background's that of an engineer, yeah. So last thing I'll say about that is at the moment, and I'm sure this will change, but at the moment, like right now, AI is not something to fear where it is right now in its current structure, in my humble opinion, because it's called artificial intelligence. But what it's actually doing, if you know, and I know you know, like it's interpolating data, it's not extrapolating data. One of the cool things that humans do with their intelligence is like, here's a data point, here's a data point, here's a third data point that just my imagination created. Amazing. Yeah. AI doesn't really do that just yet. Like you can coax it to do that, but what it's actually doing is it's using just a very deep reservoir of a lot of information that's out there and drawing the best responses on what already exists and feeding them to you. Yeah. But it's not actively, creatively coming up with new information. So like even the images stuff, people are like, oh, it came up with paint art. Yeah, but it's basing it on all this other art and it's just pulling it together, right? It's still relying heavily on interpolation rather than extrapolation. So for me, as long as it's doing that, I'm definitely not afraid of it at that point, right? When it becomes sentient and on like thinking for itself, sure. But for me, where I'm at, like I'm the eternal optimist in many ways as well. So I got to caveat my response. But I think when we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety, fundamental, like we can already see people are still warring around the world for land grabs and stuff. And I was like, come on, like, is this really still our reality? Like at this day and age? I find it hard to come to terms with, to be honest, to some degree. It's just like, okay, I can see that, you know, we need to process through maybe collectively all of our karma so we can move into these more enlightened spaces collectively. But can we, you know, consciously move our way through it already, you know? But maybe I'm being flippant about it all. I don't know enough. But the key thing in there is when I look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I feel like AI has a real potential to support us with the bottom tiers, you know, to distribute resources. Like a third of the world is starving still. A third of the world throws its food out. Pardon my French, the fuck? You know, it's like there's like, you know, with like something just a little bit more intelligent that can actually help us distribute resources like adequately, stuff like that. I think there's some real, and then I think what ends up happening is human beings can spend more and more time in creative spaces self-actualizing. So I think it's something positive from the lens that I've got at the moment.
Yeah, while you were speaking about the curiosity part, when you mentioned about if looking at your browser history, like what are you spending most time searching? Maybe AI can help with things like that, where it could look at your browser history and point out like these are the things you're actually interested in.
Curious about and can support you. Because at the moment, Google and stuff, like they do that, but they do it to advertise to you so you can consume, right? But there is potential for you to, and you know, even ChatGPT, like I use it quite a bit now. And I just say, hey, based on my, like I ask it random trippy questions like, hey, based on my behavior, my questions like that I've asked you, tell me something about myself that I don't already know. And it was like, you're like this. And I was like, oh shit, I am like that. You know, so it is very interesting. The potential is fascinating. Yeah. Thank you, Seema.
Is there, I want to make sure I don't take up too much of your time. Is there anything you would like to share about your coaching programs?
Sure. Yeah. If people are curious, coaching's quite flexible with myself. I will go ahead and say that, yeah, for those that want to go experience coaching, it's www.amrit.coach/life. That's www.amrit amrit.coach/life, LIFE. For me, yeah, look, I really love one-to-one coaching because of the intimacy that it affords us. You know, it goes into some really deep places. Like when you show up one-to-one, for me, I've got plenty of support people like, hey, you should really step back into doing, I used to like doing more programs and stuff like that, where it's a group contact. But I've recently just decided, you know, and it's been like this for the last 18 months now. It's like, I just keep doing the podcast, do one-to-one coaching. Now, the reason I like one-to-one coaching is because people come with their rubber gloves rolled up, ready to go into their own stuff, ready to evolve, and they're actually wanting to work on something. And the privacy that the one-to-one container creates gives us like real potential to go to some real deep depths that you don't really go to in a group environment. So for now, I'm trying my hardest to just maintain that one-to-one container. My time is becoming more and more sparse. Touch wood. And I know that sounds like act now. That's really not the vibe, but yeah, it's just it's harder to maintain just that as an offering. Like it's much easier. It's for people online to be doing programs and courses and stuff like that because you know their time is better spent and reimbursed elsewhere. But for me, I'm so passionate about transformation and the depths we get to in these one-to-one spaces is just like nothing else. So I'm a nerd for it. So yeah, I'm really passionate about it. For those that are interested or even curious, come along. It's a free 30-minute discovery call that link takes you to. Come along, have a chat to me for 30 minutes. Let's see where you're at, what's going on. If it's a fit, great. If it's not a fit, also great. It'd be nice to connect. Connection is my highest value, remember? So always a pleasure to meet new people. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Amrit. This was a really helpful conversation. I really enjoyed learning more about you and your whole journey. And I appreciate how open you have been about sharing some of your, also the dark soul part of the journey. So it's very inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sim. I really appreciate your time. Thank you again for having me. So inspired by the work you're doing in the world, and it's a real honor to have been here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And is there anything you'd like to share with the audience before we sign off?
Yeah, just I always find it really interesting that you'll listen to an hour of an episode, but you won't do the 20 minutes, get your values. Like for me, that always gets me. It's like you just like this was, you know, very like it's good to have the conversation, but the practical is know your values. That's where you start. So yeah, again, inspiredevolution.com/values. Please do get your values. It's just I can't emphasize that enough. Once you know that, so much clarity starts to espouse in your life.
And from what I understand, it seems like you have two websites. One is inspiredevolution.com and another is amrit.coach.
Yeah, amrit.coach is the place to go. Yeah.
Thank you so much.